Hello and welcome to DeveloPerSpective. As a developer, we come across a lot of database technologies and you would have used many of them. But today, we will speak about why you should not be using DynamoDB. Yes, you heard it right. Today we will be speaking about all the things you need to know before you plan to use DynamoDB. And subsequently, you will figure out why you should not be using DynamoDB. But why exactly we are speaking about DynamoDB? That's because DynamoDB is a DB service which has been developed by Amazon and has high integration capability with all the services of AWS. AWS is one of the biggest cloud service provider of the world. If you have ever used AWS services, you would have been tempted to use the DynamoDB. But there are some facts and limitations you should be knowing before you use DynamoDB in your application. So, by the end of this video, you will understand why you should not be using DynamoDB as a DB service for your specific application. But before that, let's see what is DynamoDB and what makes it tempting to use. Databases, as everyone knows, are majorly of two types. One is SQL database, another is NoSQL database, or also called as relational database and non-relational database. DynamoDB is a type of non-relational database. Both relational and non-relational database has its own pros and cons, which allows them to be useful in one application and is worthless in another application. But both of the databases should share the same basic fundamentals of being a database. That is, they should be easy to query, sequencing and sorting the data stored should be effective and easy. All operations should be allowed at all levels of the dataset. It should allow querying using multiple query terms. So to qualify as being a database, you have to follow these fundamentals. And any database which adheres to this rule is said to be a decent database technology. So as an AWS developer, you will also believe that DynamoDB, being the most recommended database technology by AWS, will have and adhere to all these fundamentals. But that is not true. At the first glance and with initial setups, you would be lured into believing that DynamoDB is the best DB technologies to use as it has an inbuilt UUID generator. It allows multi-level data storage. It has streams which act as a trigger for all DB operations in association with AWS Lambda. It is fast with millisecond latency as it queries only on indexes. When it comes to scalability, it allows guaranteed or on-demand capability. It is fully managed with no need to managing versions and backups. It has high availability as it has one of the best of the class service level agreement. But when we actually start using the DynamoDB and start exploring its feature, we come to know about a lot of limitations in the way DynamoDB works. So we will be discussing all those limitations I personally found when using DynamoDB, and we'll check it along with all the use cases which can arise while using DynamoDB. Normally, when it comes to the sorting of data on transit, it is kind of a common feature in almost all database technologies to do it directly at the time of database querying execution. But when I planned to do that in DynamoDB, I was surprised by the way the DynamoDB asks us to do it. Sorting of data is something that is normally not planned at the start of the development, but it arises as a dynamic requirement at a later point in the development phase. But in DynamoDB, it's not that easy to have sorting on the fly. In DynamoDB, you don't have a feature in the query which allows you to do sorting on a field at the time of query. Instead, you need to specify the sorting key either with the default partition or create a new global secondary index and then do a sorting on it. And this has to be done way before you start writing query. It has to be done at the time of creation of the table. And later, when you create the query, you would be using the default sorting key with the partition key, or you would have to specify the global secondary index you want to apply at the time of query. This is an extension of the sorting issue. In DynamoDB, we have two operations for retrieving data. One is a query and the other one is a scan. So the sorting key is only allowed with a query and is not applicable when you use scan. And if you need to use query, you should always have a key condition passed which needs to have partition key comparison done to make query operation work. Okay, so now here is a scenario where you just need to get the list of all the items that should be sorted by name. So you now need to have a sorting key created along with the partition key. And the point to be noted is that the partition key and the sorting key should not be the same fields. Then, when you query with the sorting key, you are forced to use the partition key in the key conditions field. But you actually wanted a list of all the items which has to be sorted by name. But here you are forced to have some limitation or condition in place to make this query work, which can actually reduce the dataset on which you are sorting the results. If you haven't missed the point I specified earlier, you could figure out one more limitation. So that one is to always have partition key as one of the operand in the key conditions of the query. So every time you plan to query, you are forced to use the partition key as one of the operand from either the default partition key, which is created at the time of table creation, or if you are using a global secondary index, then you need to specify the partition key specified in the index. This restricts you to create a new global secondary index every time when you plan to only query a specific field from the table and apply that partition key as the index for querying. DynamoDB allows for 32 level depth nested object in an item. But queries on those nested objects are not that simple. You do not have a simple implementation to do it, and you will find a lot of issues and complicated implementation online to get the things working. But still, for me, things would not work as DynamoDB doesn't allow relationship like one-to-many even at the item level. As I told you, nested object query is complicated, but if you want that to be along with getBatch operation, which acts as an in clause to retrieve data using a multi-valued key, then it's impossible. So if you have an array of objects in an item and you want to use the getBatch operation to retrieve by multiple keys, then actually it's impossible. Now let's speak about the comparison operations. We have two types of comparison operations which are differentiated on the basis of type of field you are using for the operation. That is key operation if it's a partition key, or normal operation which can use any field. But here the concern is that the not equal to operation is missing on key conditions. So lastly, I would like to conclude that you should plan your application before you make database structure in DynamoDB, as each table in DynamoDB can have up to 20 global secondary indexes and 5 local secondary index. Hence, each time you need to query by condition or sort for a specific field, you would be utilizing these indexes. I will be sharing all the links to the issues I mentioned, so choose wisely and make a decision.